Today we're going to be learning Yevamot Daf Tzadichet. We're going to start from the bottom of a quick review of things we saw in yesterday's daf. So we saw that there was two brothers who converted to Judaism. They're no longer considered brothers for the purposes of Yibum because any kind of relation that we view them is all connected through their mother, not from their father. And we'll talk about that more today. And therefore, only brothers from the father are obligated in Yibum, and there's no Yibum. Then the Gemara went into a machloket between Rav Sheshet and Rav Akiva about whether each is forbidden to their brother's wife, because on the one hand, they're brothers. On the other hand, ger shenit gael kekatan shenolad, it's as if they were born again, and therefore they're not related anymore. There's no connection to their relatives. However, Rav Sheshet forbade it. Despite that, Rav Akiva permitted it. So now we're in the middle of bringing sources, try to prove one over the other. We end with the source that proves Rav Sheshet, because it said, Shnei achim ta'omim, if there were two twin brothers who converted, gerim, or meshucharim, or freed slaves, lo chotzim v'lo miyavim, they don't do chalitz or yibum, ve'en chayavim mishumei shelach, and they're not liable for the brother of the wife of their brother. To which the Gemara said, I'm skipping the rest of the bright, we started already yesterday, but the last line of yesterday's daf, katani miyat en chayavim mishumei shelach, which you can infer from there, if it says you're not liable, sounds like might not be liable, but it's not permitted. Okay, it's forbidden. So now they say, no, you don't have to infer that. Okay, this happens a lot, by the way. We saw it in those who learn Masechet Shabbat. So all the time it says patur v'alasul. You're exempt. But exempt doesn't mean you're exempt, but it's permitted. You're exempt. You shouldn't do it, but you're not going to have to bring a korban chatat because it's only forbidden by rabbinic law. Okay, so lots of times we do have that kind of inference, but here they say no. No reason to infer that. Why? No, en chayavim means you're not liable and it's not forbidden. Why did it say then en chayavim? It should have just said, it's permitted. So they say, because of the continuation, en chayavim, you're not liable in this case. Tananami reisha en chayavim. I'm sorry, aval chayavim, because it says later, you are liable. So here it used the language, you're not liable, but it doesn't mean you're not liable, but you shouldn't do it. No, it means you're not liable and it's totally permitted. Amarav, hada amor Rabbanan ein av lemitzli. Okay, now some people have the nusach ein av legoy. Okay, now we're going to get back to this issue of the father. The fact that we say when it comes to Gentiles, and whether it's Egyptian, it doesn't really matter. It means all Gentiles. We don't go by the father. We don't say this is only if we know that they're always involved in inappropriate behavior with sleeping around with other women. But even if we know this is the father for sure, still lo cheshina. Okay, we don't go by the father at all. Why? So they say, okay, so don't think that, but even if we know exactly who the father is, we're not concerned and we don't say, oh, they're brothers from the father, and maybe you should do yibum. How do we know this? Because look at the case, and this is why we're bringing this up now, because we can prove it from the bright we just saw. Now, how do people become twins? So the Gemara is going to explain it to you in case you didn't know. Right? It was one drop that split into two. Right, so that's the idea of twins. Okay, the way they're describing it is kind of an interesting manner, but yeah, okay, it was one that split into two, meaning it's clear they have the same father, and yet it's super clear. And yet, what do we say? You still don't do chalitz or yibum in this case. So they say, Shma mina, if kure efkare rachmana lizaleh, seems like the Torah treated their zera as if it's hefker, meaning we have no idea who the father is, no matter what. Why is this? Again, our modern eyes aren't going to like this, but again, you have to remember who they were dealing with in those days and who the Gentiles were. Again, not all of them were like this, but many of them were, and therefore they say, okay, their flesh and their seed that comes out is like animals, right, where they sleep around with, right? There's no mate that's designated one. Okay, next, Tashma. Next source we're going to try to bring. This one is going to try to prove Rabbi Akiva. The Amar Rabbi Yossi. Maseh b'niftiam hagel. Okay, now we're going to pull it up, the presentation. Maseh b'niftiam hagel. Shenasa eshet achiv me'imo. Okay, so what's the story here? So and let's just read on a little bit more. It came before the rabbis. Okay, we'll have to explain that in 1 minute. So let's start. Jenny was married to James. They had a child, Niftiam. He was the guy who converted. They got divorced, and Jenny marries somebody else. She marries Harry, and they have a son named Peter. So Peter and Niftiam are brothers through the mother. Okay, that's Eshet Achiv Me'imo. That's what we're talking about now. And that's, we haven't yet seen his wife, but Peter marries Bella, and now they all convert. Okay, it could be even the parents. It's not really relevant, but Peter converts, Bella converts, and Niftiam converts. Okay, so they're all Jewish now. But they're brothers, right? But they were brothers before they converted. So now we have an issue. So Peter divorces Bella, Niftiam marries Bella. And what did the rabbi say? The rabbi said, this is fine. Okay, we'll get to this next case in a minute. So let's hold off. So what do we say here? And what did the Chachamim say? Ein ishut legel. So now what does that mean? So the Gemara says, what do you mean, ein ishut legel? Sounds like what it means is that they're saying his brother was never really married to Bella because there's no such thing as ishut when it comes to gerim. Okay, converts. When they marry someone, it's not really marriage. And you're wondering what on earth are you talking about, which is exactly what the Gemara says. The Gemara says, right, you have to remember also, if Peter and Bella were married and then converted, then they get married again once they convert. So it seems like they were married while they were Jews. So the Gemara said, and then of course there's ishut. So the Gemara says, wait a minute. Ella ger de kidesh hachanami lo tafsi bakidushin. You're going to say any convert who gets married, there's no real marriage there. Of course, we don't say that. So Ella, what do we mean? Ella ema ein isur eshet ach leger. What it meant when it said ein ishut leger, it didn't really mean ein ishut leger. What it meant, right? Ein ishut means there's no relationships through marriage. Didn't mean that. It meant ein isur eshet ach leger. That's what they were saying. It's not forbidden for Niftiam to have married his brother's wife. Again, obviously assuming Peter divorced his wife or Peter died, something like that. So now, that proves Rabbi Akiva very clearly, although we'll see maybe not so clearly. So now the Gemara says, "My lav dinas ba'ach keshu gel," right? Wasn't it? And this is what I said before. Peter married Bella once they had already converted. It could be they were married before, but again, they got married once they had converted to Judaism. In which case, it would prove Rabbi Akiva's point that once the brothers convert, you're allowed to marry the brother's wife. Because even though even though they're brothers and they both converted, it doesn't matter. They're both as if they're not related when they get married. Well, I'm sorry, when they convert. So now the Gemara says, no, you can explain it differently. It's not like it shows in our story. Peter and Bella, maybe even both converted, okay? But they didn't get married again once they converted. They probably didn't live together, it seems like. They weren't, okay? They weren't a couple. Maybe they got divorced before they converted. Okay, and then just both randomly converted, or as long as she converted, it doesn't, right? Well, I guess he converted also because we're trying to find about two brothers. Or we could say maybe he didn't convert at all. Anyway, it doesn't really matter. The point is, if they weren't married when he was Jewish, then of course there's no issue at all. And then to which the Gemara says, wait a minute. If that's the case, that he was Gentile when he married her, and he wasn't married to her as a Jew, well, then what's the chiddush? Like, obviously, Niftiam can marry her because she has no connection to Peter once they were Jews. Like, anything that happened before is sort of irrelevant. So they say, well, maybe you would have thought not. Maybe you should make a gzera and say, we're going to forbid it if he was married to her when he was a non-Jew, because if we allow that, you might think that it's permitted even if he's married to her when he's Jewish. So therefore, Kamash Malan, that's why they're telling you, no, you don't have to worry about that. It's not the case. Tashma. Okay, next case. Amar ben Yassi. So Ben Yassian tells the following story. We'll get back to these charts soon. So he tells the following story. When I went abroad, okay, it was by the villages by the water. It doesn't have to be abroad. It was just when I went by the water, often they did their trades there. So they found out all sorts of interesting things. I met a ger, a convert, he married, exactly our case, his brother's wife through his mother. In other words, they share the same mother. Amarti lo bini mihir shacha, who permitted this? Amarli hare isha b'shiva banea al safsal ze yashav Rabbi Akiva ba'amar shnei dvarim. There was a woman who had 7 sons. Okay, a bit of a strange case, although we'll see even stranger cases today. She had 7 sons. Each of those sons married women. They all divorced their wives and then married their brothers' wives. Okay, and they'd all converted. And I saw them on this bench, sat Rabbi Akiva, and he said 2 things. Ger nosei eshet achiv meimo. Okay, a ger can marry his wife's brother, his brother's wife through his mother, right? That they're related through the mother. Ve'amal, and he said, "Vayidvar Hashem elai." This is totally unconnected. There were just 2 halachot that on this bench, Rabbi Akiva said, when Hashem spoke to Yonah, it says, "Vayidvar Hashem al Yonah shenit." In the story of Yonah, it says, first he spoke to him, and then it says he spoke to him a second time. Why does it say a second time? To teach you, he only spoke to him twice. He didn't speak to him 3 times. Okay, this seems to be indicating maybe, although we'll see, not all interpretations of the Gemara later are going to believe this, but that maybe the idea here is that Yonah had no other prophecies other than this one. Okay, and that this was his whole, right, life as a prophet was all about this. And that's why it says the second time to show you there was no 3rd time. So the Gemara says, okay, some ask the question, what about the kikayon at the end of the story? Maybe that wasn't exactly a nivuah, maybe it wasn't even a conversation, maybe it was all in a dream, or I guess all could be dreams, but there's some interpretations that try to answer that. I'm not going to get into it right now. So now they say, okay, the point being that Katani mihat, let's go back to this source. Ger nosei esh achiv meimo. Again, my love dinas b'achiv shugel. Wasn't it that the ger was married, right? He was married to her once he converted, in which case the brothers allowed, which means Rabbi Acha's right. To which they say, lo, we're going to have the same thing a few times today. Lo, dinas b'shuave kochavim. He'd only married her when she was a Gentile. In which case, Ma'ala Meimra, so why are they telling you this? It's obvious. To which they say, no, you might have thought, maybe we'll forbid it when he's a Gentile, because you might think that it's going to be permitted if he was married to her when he was Jewish. Kamash Malan teaches you, no, we're not worried about that. Now we have a few questions before we move on, a few questions about this source. There's a few strange things. First of all, why would this ger be believed to tell us this tradition he heard from Rabbi Akiva that permitted him to marry his wife, who's his brother's wife, who was his brother's wife? So how do we believe him? Don't we have this idea? Is he believed? When a Talmid Chacham comes to teach halacha, if it's before the action happened, we believe him. Ve'im lav, if it's after the act and he then says, oh, well, I have a tradition that proves this is okay, we don't believe him because he could be just trying to prove it and he's just saying it. We don't necessarily know he's telling the truth. So im lav, ein shomim, we don't believe him. So how could we believe this person? So we're going to have 3 possible answers. Maybe he told this story about Rabbi Akiva before, and his tradition, before he actually married the woman. And then he married her subsequently. Even though in this story, he told him after, but it could be he's already told this to somebody else beforehand, before he actually married her. That's option number 1. Option number 2, mishum deka'amal harei shavashiva banea. Well, he had a proof for it. It wasn't like he just said it. He had a proof that this woman and her 7 sons did this, and maybe everyone knew that they did it based on Rabbi Akiva, so he had some sort of something to rely on. He was bringing a tradition of Rabbi Akiva about 2 things. So maybe because we believe him about the other one, we can also believe him about this one. Okay, that it came as a package deal, so he's probably not making it up. Okay, moving on. Another thing about this bright Amar Mar, Yidvar Hashem al Yonah shenit limo. So shenit dibraimo shchina shelo dibraimo. That was just a quote that from the bright that we already saw. He only spoke to him twice, which means twice and not 3 times. So now the Gemara says, wait a minute. It says in Sefer Melachim, we're talking about Yeravam ben Yoash, he was one of the kings, and it says, Hu heshiv et gvul Yisrael milavo chamar ad yam ha'arava, ki dvar Hashem asher diber biyad abdo Yonah ben Amitai hanavi. It says he returned the borders of Israel to bigger borders than they used to be before, as it was told to the prophet Yonah ben Amitai, who's our Yonah, and that Yeravam ben Yoash was going to do this. To which they say, Amravina al iskin nimbe kamal. In other words, when he said he only spoke to him twice and not 3 times, that was about nimbe. There was nothing else, no other word of God about the issue of nimbe. But God spoke to Yonah about other things as well, and this contradicts what I suggested before. The second answer doesn't. Rav Nachman bar Yitzchak amar hachi kama, ki dvar Hashem asher haya biyad avdo hanavi. It's not that Yeravam ben Yoash returned the border based on, and this was a fulfillment of the prophecy that Yonah received. No. It was like the prophecy that Yonah received. In what way? Just like Nimbe, everything was switched from bad to good. Also, things got switched for the Jews from bad to good. Okay, so it was like Yonah in the Nimbe story. Tashma. Another source we're going to try to use to prove, but this is a very long source and the cases get a little bit complicated, although not so complicated, but we'll use presentations to help out with the cases. Okay, so now we have all these cases where we have a ger shaya ledato b'kedusha b'orato shelo b'kedusha, or some versions say it in the opposite order, but it means the same thing. So let's start with the other order. Horato shelo b'kedusha, his mother became pregnant with him when she was still a Gentile. That means we're not going to regard his father, because his father was, even if his father converted, he was a Gentile then when she got pregnant with him. But his ledato is b'kedusha, but he was born a Jew, okay, because his mother converted when he was in utero. So now, yesh lo she'el ha'em ve'en lo she'el ha'av. Okay, he has relatives through his mother. We're going to count all the relatives through his mother, and he's forbidden to those relatives, but not through the father. Ketzad. So we're going to see Ketzad, and then we'll get into the reason for all this. Nasal chotom na'em yotzi. So what happens? So Jenny and Harry are married. They have a daughter, Bella, and then they get divorced. Okay, they're all Gentiles right now. Then Jenny marries Nick, and she's pregnant with Nick, and she converts, Harry converts, Bella converts, and also Nick converts. It should have a convert on Nick's head. Okay, whether Harry converts or not, it's not really relevant. The main thing is that Bella converts, the daughter from her first marriage, and now she's pregnant from her second marriage, and she's about to give birth. But before she gives birth, she converts. So when her son, Peter, is born, he's born a Jew. But again, his pregnancy, right, he was conceived, he was still a Gentile. So now, if he wants to marry his converted sister, Bella, who's his sister through his mother, if he did, Yotzi, he has to divorce her, okay? He needs to give her a get, okay? He can't stay married to her because she's her relative through his mother. Now, what's the reason why all this is forbidden? Because isn't a katan, right? Gershon olad ki katan gershit gayer ki katan shen olad. We've learned they don't, right? Bella is no longer related to him. So what? That they had the same mother, the mother converted, the daughter converted, they're not anymore the same, right? He doesn't have a relationship with them like he did before. So what's the issue? Or Bella in particular, right? Maybe he's still connected with his mother because he was born when she was already a convert. But for sure he's not related to Bella anymore. So Rashi explains that what's the reason here? The reason is that we're worried that, let me just get all the reasons straight in my head because there's a few different reasons. Right, we're worried if Peter has a sister that's born after, he was born as a Jew. And if he has a sister who's born later, then he's forbidden to that sister because he was already born a Jew and she was born Jewish and then they're related. So because of that, we forbid Bella, the one who was born before, because since he's this in between, right? He was conceived before, but born after. So he looks like he was born a Jew, even though he was sort of not 100%. Because of that, we're going to forbid the sister from before so that we don't think that if he can marry his sister from before, maybe he can marry his sister after. And that he can't do. That's a Rashi. In the Gemara elsewhere, it talks about that there's a separate issue, which is that if we allow him to marry a sister who is forbidden to him from before, okay, like a regular, again, this wouldn't even be necessarily Horato Shelo B'kedusha. This would be anyone, and that's a bit of a weakness, or maybe why the Gemara doesn't raise it here. But that when a Gentile is a Gentile, they're obligated in the 7 mitzvot b'nei Noach. Now, if you're obligated the 7 Noahide laws, now one of them is Giloi Arayot, which means he couldn't sleep with his sister before he was converted. If now when he converts, he's permitted to his sister, maybe people will convert in order to be permitted to marry their sister, or they'll say, oh, Judaism is so much easier. And certainly we don't want that. So that's another possibility. Tosfot raises a third possibility, which is, and again, that's really not mentioned here because that would be more of an issue for Peter if he was before, right? He was alive before, and he was a real convert. Okay, he would have been born Jewish, not Jewish. Another reason Tosfot brings up is that because he looks Jewish, because he was born Jewish, and he can marry his sister, right? Even though she wasn't, right? It'll look like, right? Jews will think they can also marry their sisters. So because of that, it's another reason. Okay, so that's the first case of where he can't stay married to her because it's a relative through the mother. Now we're going to talk about what's from the father. So if Harry and Jenny were married and had Bella, and then Harry, this time it's the father who has another wife, Hermione. So she gets pregnant, and then she converts, and Harry converts and Bella converts. Okay, maybe Jenny also. Again, it doesn't really matter. The main thing is that Bella is now Jewish, and then Hermione has the baby, Peter, and then Peter marries Bella. Now, again, they can stay together, Yekayim. Why is that? Because this is all relative through the father. And since we don't consider Peter connected to his father, it doesn't really matter any relative through the father, because again, she got pregnant with him before she was Jewish. Okay, another case. There's going to be 6 cases here. Okay, 3 are going to be allowed and 3 are going to be forbidden, although one there's a machloket about. Achot ha'av min ha'em yotzi. Okay, so this is basically the sister of his father through that they share the same mother. Okay, the father the father and his sister are siblings through the mother. Okay, that would mean Lily had 2 husbands, James and Nick. One, right? First, then she got divorced from James and married Nick. She ended up with a child, Harry, with James, and a child, Blair, through Nick. And then Harry marries Jenny. She's pregnant. Then they all convert. Okay, so Jenny, Harry, and Blair all convert. Right, remember, Harry's sisters with brothers with Blair. They have a son, Peter, and Peter marries Blair, who's his aunt, basically through his father. But remember, the father and the mother are related. The father and the sister are related through the mother. So that's going to be a problem because anything from the mother, Yotzi. Okay, he's going to need to give her a get. But if it was achot ha'av min ha'av, meaning the sister of his father who shared the same father, okay, James was married to 2 different women, and then right there, his son is Harry from one marriage, and his daughter is Blair from another marriage. They're siblings through the father, and then Harry marries Jenny. Jenny gets pregnant. They all convert, and they have a child, Peter, and Peter marries Blair. That's going to be a problem. I'm sorry, that's not going to be a problem because they're only related. Blair and Harry are siblings through the father, so Peter can actually stay married to her. Okay, case number 5. Achot ha'em min ha'em. This is now, instead of brother and sister, it's sister and sister through the mother. So again, it's basically the aunt through the mother, but from the sister, his mother's sister rather than his father's sister. And the mother and the sister are sisters through the mother. So that's obviously going to be Yotzi because it's all mother. Okay, and then he'll have to get divorced. But if here comes the case where there's a machloket, achot ha'em min ha'av. It's his mother's sister, so it's through the mother, but the mother and the sister are related through their father. Okay, so if Jenny and Blair are sisters, but they're sisters through the father, and Jenny has a child, Peter, and Peter marries Blair, then according to Rabbi Meir, Omer Yotzi, Chachamim Omrim Yekayim. That there's a debate about, okay, and we're going to see that inside right now. Why is that? Yekayim, because Shaya Rabbi Meir Omer, why does Rabbi Meir say Yotzi? Kol erva shum mishum shel ha'em Yotzi. Okay, basically it has something to do with the mother. Anything that has anything to do with the mother is Yotzi. Mishum ha'av Yekayim, only if it's because of the father, and here it's got a mother in the picture, even though the mother's related to her sister through the father. Umutal be'eshet achiv me'imo. This is the next case, okay? And here's the case we've been talking about all along. The mother's, right? It's his brother's wife, who is his brother through his mother, right? So we have Nick and Lily were married, but got divorced, but they had a son, Ron, and then Lily marries James, and then James, Lily, and Ron all convert, maybe Nick also. Ron marries Devorah, and then, right, Lily and James have a son named Harry. So now Harry wants to marry after Ron divorces his wife, Devorah, or dies or whatever. Harry wants to go marry Devorah, so he's permitted to marry Devorah because, again, this is according, and this is why we brought this source, seems to be according to Rabbi Akiva that you can marry your brother's wife. Okay, now, next case. We'll see later if we really can prove this, because we're going to say the same thing that we said last time. Okay, that, you can say that wasn't exactly the case. It was that he was married to her before when he was Gentile. Anyway, we'll get back to that. But we're going to continue in this brayta. There's still a lot more cases. Ube eshet aviv. Okay, now the wife of his brother's father. Okay, so we're going to see what this is in a minute. Ron and Harry are brothers. Harry marries Jenny. She gets pregnant, then ends up having this baby right after she converts. So Peter's born already Jewish. His father is Harry, and his father's brother is Ron, and Ron was married to Devorah. And now Peter wants, right after Ron and Devorah get divorced, Peter is permitted to Devorah, another relationship that he's permitted to. Okay, next. Okay, we're going to get back to this other stuff in a while. Let's stop the presentation. Okay, now. Okay, that's the end of the brayta. All other arayot are permitted. So the Gemara says, La tuye, what's it coming to include? Eshet av, even your father's wife is permitted to you. Okay, that's already through marriage, as opposed to, let's say, his sister. Okay, his father's wife is permitted. Nasai shal bita, what if he married a woman and her daughter? Okay, he can stay married to one, but he has to divorce the other. Lechatchila lo yichnos. But ideally, he shouldn't marry them. We don't really know what this is referring to, because we just said he can marry one, divorce another, and then we said what he shouldn't. Ideally, what we don't know. Okay, we'll see later that this line seems to be referring to something much earlier in the brayta. Meta ishto mutar b'chamoto. Okay, we're back in the brayta now, right? We took a little break to ask what was that including, and now we're going to go back and understand more. Right, we're going through more cases in the brayta. Meta ishto mutar b'chamoto. If his wife died, he's permitted to the mother-in-law. Again, this is all because they're converts. Some people say actually he's forbidden to his mother-in-law. However, it says butal be'eshet achiv. So now, okay, we're done with the brayta. Now we're going to go and explain why we brought this, because it says butar be'eshet achiv, which sounds like Rabbi Akiva. My love dinas ba'achiv kshuger. Is it not that he married her when he was a convert? No, the brother was only married to her when he was a Gentile, and that's why it's permitted. Again, the Gemara is going to say, what is this teaching us? Well, you might have thought we have to make a gzera, because maybe then you'll permit it when he's Jewish, and kamash malan, no, you don't need to, and that's why they told you. But in any case, now we're going to go back. So we don't have a proof for Rabbi Akiva. We're now going to go back and understand a bunch of the parts of this brayta that weren't so clear. Amar, nasai shal bita kones echad motzi echad. Okay, so if he was married when he was Gentile to a woman and her daughter, then when he becomes Jewish, he marries one and gets rid of the other wife. So now, right, it seems weird. It sounds like motzi usually means he has to give her a get, but they were never married. How could he give it right? They weren't married Jewish. It seems a little bit weird, this case. Anyway, I'll leave that as a question. Anyway, so that doesn't make any sense. We just said you can't stay married to her. Of course you can't do it lechatchila. You can't even do it with Yevid. You have to get rid of her. So why would it say lechatchila? So hatamkai. It was referring to the earlier part of the Mishnah, hachikama, the brayta, and this is what it means to say. Hafta amur rabbanan yikayem. All the cases that we saw in the beginning, those 6 cases where we had some you could stay married and some you had to get a divorce. When we say yikayem, it's only b'diavad. If you already married her, you could stay married, but ideally you shouldn't marry her. Meta ishto mutar b'chamoto, v'ikaditane asur b'chamoto. So why is this machloket? What's it based on? Chad Rabbi Yishmael, v'chad Rabbi Akiva. We talked about this just a few days ago. Manda asal Rabbi Yishmael. Amar chamoto lachar mitab yisur hakaime v'gabei ger gazru be'Rabbanan. Because it's forbidden for a Jew, therefore it's going to be forbidden also to a Gentile. We're going to make a gzera, right? Even though normally you're really not. It's not a problem. But the next thing is, what about Rabbi Akiva? V'chad Rabbi Akiva. Why? Uman deshare Rabbi Akiva damal chamoto lachamita kalish leisuri. Already views this as a weakened prohibition, and therefore Gabi Gerlo Gazru Rabbanan, because he viewed it as weaker. Once the person was dead, it was already a weaker forbidden. Wasn't forbidden as strongly as it was when they're married. Therefore, when it comes to a convert, there was no reason to make a gzera there, and therefore they permitted. Okay, now we're going to get to our Mishnah, which is a very interesting case. Hard to imagine, especially nowadays when people are born. They're born and they're in a hospital and they put bracelets on and everybody knows whose baby's who to make sure there's no confusion. But our Mishnah talks about a situation that's not exactly like that. Chamesh nashim shenitarvu v'ladotehem. So 5 women, okay, Rachel, Rachel, Leah, Yael, Chana, Penina, and they have 5 children that all get mixed up. They're the ones on the side in gray, Binyamin, Levi, Shaul, Yishai, and Yehuda. They get all mixed up. We don't know whose baby's who. Okay, they get mixed up in the beginning of their lives, and they grow up, and no one really knows who the real mother is. Higdilu hata'arovot, v'nasu nashim umetu, right? Sounds like the Shlomo HaMelech story. So now these kids grew up, okay, and they got married. All these 5 men got married. Okay, you'll see how absurd the case is because it's rare that this would happen. And not only that, but they all died, umetu, okay? All 5 of them died without children, obviously, because we're talking about Yibum. So now we have these other 5 children, Yosef, Reuven, David, Shmuel, and Shimon, who are all the legitimate sons that we know 100% are the sons of Rachel, Leah, Yael, Chana, and Penina. So now we have these 5 sons who are definitely the sons of these women. And now they each have a brother. We just don't know who their brother is, that they're supposed to do Yibum with their wife. So what do we do? Who does Yibum with who, and how do we resolve this situation? So we now end up with a very interesting law. Arba'ah chotzin la'echad. So let's take the first 4. Yosef, Reuven, David, Shmuel, all do chalitza to the first one, to Miriam. Okay? And Echad, Shimon, the last one who's left, Mia Be'motah. Shimon does Yibum with Miriam. Okay? He's the last one. He does it after everyone does chalitza. He does Yibum. We're going to explain the Gemara why this is. Hu ushlosha. Now we get to the next woman. So now we have to deal with Yocheved. So he, Shimon, who did Yibum with the first one, he now and Shloshan, another 3 of them, do chalitza, chotzin le'echad. Do chalitza with Yocheved. Ve'echad mi'abein. Okay, and the next one does Yibum. Okay, so Shmuel does Yibum with Yocheved. And so on and so on. So now we take, right, David is going to be, right, the only one who doesn't do chalitza, right? So Shmuel and Shimon, who already did Yibum with one of them, are going to do chalitza with Ruth. And so is Yosef and Reuven. And David is going to do Yibum with Ruth. And then again, right, all the others other than Reuven are going to do chalitza, and Reuven's going to do Yibum with Naomi. And then all the others are going to do chalitza with all the other women, and Yosef is going with Esther, and Yosef is going to do Yibum with her. Okay? Nimtzu arba chalitzot. Sorry, I moved too fast. Nimtzu arba chalitzot v'yibum l'chol echat ve'echad. Okay? So everybody did 4 chalitzas and 1 Yibum. Okay, sounds very complicated. So first, let's explain this whole thing. The Gemara says, "V'davka michlat v'hadi Yibumim." You obviously have to do all the first 4 do chalitza first, and then the last one who's left does Yibum in each case with each woman. Why? Okay, we have a bunch of issues here. If, let's say, okay, and we're in the last case. So Yosef does Yibum with Esther. If he started doing Yibum with Esther, and really he's not the Yabam, and let's say Reuven really is the brother, then he's going to end up doing Yibum with someone which basically, okay, let's even start simple. Yosef, each one of them can actually, why can they do Yibum with anyone they want? Because theoretically, it's either Yibum, or if it's not Yibum, they could just marry them. They're not related to them. They're not brothers with each other, right? They're only brothers with one of these guys who died. So they can marry the wife to do either Yibum, or, right, if they're the brother, then they're doing Yibum. If they're not the brother of this person, well, then it's permitted for him to marry the wife. But it's only permitted if they did Chalitza first, because otherwise they're Shomeret Yabam, who can't marry anybody else. So that's why everybody does Chalitza first, and then the last guy does Yibum, in the hopes that maybe it's his Yevamot. If not, he just marries a random woman, okay? Now, and there's obviously no concern here for, well, what if he doesn't want to marry her? That's not an issue. So now they say, Mahi, but how does this work? What's this line about Shlosha chotzim le'echad? To lo tema yivminu chad lekulu. In other words, what did we make sure here? Each guy does Yibum only once. Why, right? It said, who, right? My who, I read it wrong. My who v'shlosha chotzim le'echad. What's this he and the other 3? In other words, the one who did Yibum now does chalitza. Why? Why don't you? And this is really like a mathematical thing. Why don't you say, right? Okay. In other words, theoretically, each, right, we want, in the end, we want everyone to do Yibum once. Why? Theoretically, you could have had it. Okay, let's look at the next picture. Theoretically, you could have had Delo Tema Yeminu Chad Lekulu. Why are you not saying that one could do Yibum to all 5 of them? Theoretically, you could have Yosef, Reuben, David, and Shmuel come along and do Chalitza with all 5 women, and Shimon comes along and does Yibum with all 5 women. Why not? First of all, if you think about mathematically, what are the chances are that, right, if each one does Yibum with one woman, what are the chances are that it's the one who's they're supposed to do Yibum with, right? Maybe you'll end up with 0 for 0, right? 0 for 5, 0 for 5, right? You'll end up with none. If Shimon does Yibum with all of them, at least we know for sure you'll have one Yibum. And what's the problem though? You know for sure you'll only have one Yibum. And what do they say here, right? They're somehow hoping, and maybe they think there's siyata dishmaya here, as we say, right? The help of God, that maybe they'll each, in not this solution, this is the wrong solution and that we're showing in the chart here. This is not what the Mishnah says, that Shimon does Yibum with all of them, which maybe mathematically is better because you'll definitely get one Yibum. In the other case, theoretically, you could potentially have 5 who each marry their Yevamot, and we'd rather have the mitzvah of Yibum fulfilled, and therefore we'd rather go with that option with the potential for 5, even though you might end up 0 for 5. Okay, that's the choice they choose. Okay, it could have been otherwise, but that's what the Mishnah decides that we should do. Okay, next issue. Miksatan achim umiksatan she'en achim. What if some of them are brothers with each other, and some are not brothers with each other? The ones who are brothers do chalitza, the ones who are not brothers do yibum. My kamar, what on earth are you talking about? Well, Amar Rav Safri explains hachi kamar. Miksatan achim mina av umiksatan achim mina em. What if? Okay, so now let's start off. We have Reuven, who's married to Rachel, and then also married to Hannah. Okay, we'll see why in a minute he divorces Rachel, but they have a son named Yosef. Okay, Reuven and Rachel have a son, Yosef, and Reuven's also married to Hannah. Ruth and Boaz have a son named David. So Yosef and David are not related at all, but in the end, Rachel marries Boaz. Okay, and then what's the issue here? Well, we now have Boaz is married to Ruth, and they have a son, David. Okay, they also have another son. Rachel and Boaz have a son. So Boaz has a son named David, and he has another son here that needs Yibum. Reuven has a son named Yosef and another son who needs Yibum. What's the problem? The problem is that the one to the right of Yosef here, who's David's brother, who David's supposed to do Yibum with because they share the same father, well, Yosef and him share the same mother, Rachel. Now, why is that a big deal? Because when you want to do Yibum, remember, you can't normally marry your brother's wife unless there's a chiyuv of Yibum, and Yibum only goes through the father. That means that Yosef, right? Remember, they each have one brother that was their brother they're supposed to do Yibum with. Yosef's supposed to do it with Reuven's son. Now, we don't know, right? What's the problem here? We'll show on the next slide. We don't know, let's say, right, these two are Levi and Binyamin. We just don't know which one's Levi and which one's Binyamin. Now, if Binyamin is Rachel's son with Boaz, then Yosef is not allowed to marry his wife because he shares the same mother, but not the same father. So there's no obligation of Yibum, but there is an Isur of Eshet Ach. So therefore, Achim and Na'em have to do Chalitza. So if any of these 5 are brothers through the mother, then with one of these brothers that got mixed up, and when they were babies, they have to do Chalitza. But David, who only has a brother through the father, can do the Yibum. Okay, that's that case. And then, okay, so that we'll see here, right? So if Binyamin and Levi marry women and they die, so David would do Yibum with both of those women, theoretically, and Yosef would do Chalitza with both of them, okay? So you would have, in that case, one brother would do Yibum with 2 of the women. Okay, Miksatan Kohanim and Miksatan She'en Kohanim. Again, we're gonna have another issue. If they're Kohanim, and some are Kohanim and some aren't Kohanim, then again, Kohanim Chotzim She'en Kohanim Yabnim, right? So again, instead of them all doing Chalitza, and only one doing Yibum, no, the Kohanim can't marry someone who Chalitza was done to, because that's forbidden for a Kohen to marry a Chalitza, because it's like a Grusha, like a divorcee. So the ones who aren't Kohanim do the Yibum for the ones who are Kohanim. In other words, for the women who those Kohanim can't do Yibum with, so they'll do an extra Yibum. Miksatan Kohanim and Miksatan Achim and Na'em, elu ve'elu chotzim v'lo miyabnim. If you have some who are Kohanim and some who are brothers through the mother, and that covers all your brothers, well, then no one's going to do Yibum at all in that situation, and all of them will do Chalitza. Okay, we will continue with this interesting case tomorrow. And, right, it's another good theoretical crazy case that the Gemara is using to get to certain concepts about the things that we're learning, to understand it in a conceptual framework. Okay, we're back to the regular Zoom tomorrow, so meet up then for those who come on the Zoom. Have a great day, everyone.